I was standing in my bedroom closet when my phone buzzed with a notification I never expected to see. My vintage Chantilly lace wedding dress, the one I wore 32 years ago, the one I said my future daughter-in-law could borrow for her wedding next month, was listed on eBay with a starting bid of $15,000. My hands went numb. I refreshed the page 3 times, certain I was seeing things, but there it was, photographed in what looked like a hotel room, described as rare 1990s couture bridal gown, museum quality, never worn. Never worn. I had danced in that dress until my feet bled. I had cried tears of joy into that lace. And now someone was selling my memories like they meant nothing at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Patricia Holloway, and I am 58 years old. I raised my son Marcus by myself after his father walked out when he was 4, working double shifts at the hospital, putting him through college, watching him grow into a kind, thoughtful man who proposed to his girlfriend Sienna 6 months ago in front of the entire family at Christmas dinner. She seemed wonderful at first, warm and enthusiastic, always complimenting my cooking, always asking about my nursing stories, always touching Marcus's arm in that affectionate way that made me think he had finally found someone who truly loved him. When she asked to borrow my wedding dress 2 weeks ago, I was honored. I pulled it from the preservation box where it had lived for 3 decades, showed her the delicate beadwork my mother had sewn by hand, the silk buttons down the back that took 20 minutes to fasten, the way the train pooled like water when you stood still. She held it against herself in front of my bedroom mirror and said it was perfect, said it was exactly what she had dreamed of, said she would treat it like the treasure it was. I believed her. I handed it over in the original garment bag with strict instructions about dry cleaning and storage, and she kissed my cheek and called me the best future mother-in-law in the world. That was 11 days ago. Today I was searching online for vintage bridal veils to match the dress when I typed in the wrong search term and stumbled across the listing purely by accident. I recognized the lace pattern immediately, the specific placement of the pearls along the neckline, the tiny repair my mother made near the left shoulder after I caught it on a rose bush during photos. I clicked on the seller's profile. The username was Sienna Style Vintage. My chest tightened. I scrolled through her other listings, designer handbags, luxury shoes, estate jewelry, all described in the same breathless language about rarity and value. I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone until the screen went dark. I called Marcus first, my fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted, music playing in the background. Mom, hey, what's up? I tried to keep my voice steady. Is Sienna with you? No, she is at her sister's place for the weekend, some bridesmaid thing. Why? I hesitated, unsure how to say it without sounding accusatory, without sounding like the overbearing mother-in-law stereotype I had promised myself I would never become. I just wanted to check something about the dress, I said carefully. Has she mentioned anything about alterations or fittings? He paused. Not to me, but she has been pretty secretive about wedding stuff, wants it all to be a surprise, you know how she is. I did know, or at least I thought I did. She had insisted on planning everything herself, refused help with vendor meetings, kept all the details locked away like state secrets, said she wanted the wedding to be a perfect revelation on the day itself. At the time it seemed romantic, whimsical even, but now it felt like something else entirely. I hung up without telling him what I had found. I needed to be sure first, needed to confirm I was not losing my mind or jumping to conclusions. I took screenshots of the listing, zoomed in on every detail, compared them to photos I had from my own wedding day. The match was undeniable. Same dress, same imperfections, same history being sold to the highest bidder by the woman who was supposed to become part of my family. I felt sick. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water I could not drink, stood at the sink staring out at the backyard where Marcus used to play as a child, where I had imagined future grandchildren running through the grass someday, and wondered how I had missed the signs. Because there had been signs, small ones I had dismissed or rationalized away. The way Sienna always steered conversations toward money, toward investments and assets and what things were worth. The time she asked me point-blank how much my house was valued at, laughing it off as innocent curiosity when I deflected. The expensive gift she gave Marcus that seemed beyond what a nonprofit coordinator should be able to afford. Gifts she explained away with vague mentions of family money and good luck. I had wanted so badly to like her, to welcome her, to believe my son had found his person, that I ignored the quiet discomfort in my gut telling me something was off. I opened my laptop and created a burner email account, something anonymous and untraceable. Then I sent a message through eBay's system asking the seller if the dress was still available, and if I could see additional photos, particularly of the inside label and any alterations that had been made. I held my breath and waited. The reply came back within 15 minutes. Absolutely, the dress is still available and in pristine condition. No alterations needed. Fits like a dream. Happy to send more photos. Are you interested in bidding? I wrote back saying I was very interested but wanted to authenticate the piece first. Could she tell me where she acquired it? Another pause, longer this time, then a response that made my stomach drop. This is a family heirloom from my future mother-in-law. One of a kind, she is letting me sell it to help fund our honeymoon. Very bittersweet, but she insisted. I read that line 5 times, each word landing like a physical blow. She was not just selling my dress, she was lying about it, claiming I had given her permission, using my generosity as a cover story for her betrayal. I stood up from the table so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I needed to confront her, needed to hear her explain this to my face, but I also needed leverage, needed proof she could not talk her way out of. I went back to the listing and placed a bid, a serious one, high enough to show intent but not so high it would scare off other bidders. Then I messaged her again. I am very interested and would like to arrange a viewing before the auction ends. Would tomorrow work? I live in the area and can meet anywhere convenient for you. She responded almost immediately. Tomorrow is perfect. How about 2 o'clock at the Grandview Hotel downtown? I can bring the dress and we can finalize everything. Looking forward to meeting you. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. No idea the anonymous buyer she was so eager to meet was the woman whose trust she had shattered. I confirmed the meeting and spent the rest of the evening planning exactly what I would say. How I would stay calm. How I would make sure Marcus saw the truth before she had a chance to spin another lie. That night I barely slept. I lay awake replaying every interaction I had ever had with Sienna, searching for the moment I should have known, the red flag I should have caught. There was the time she offered to help me clean out my attic and seemed far too interested in what was stored up there, asking about antiques and collectibles, taking photos of old furniture she claimed she wanted to recreate for the wedding but now seemed like she was cataloging inventory. There was the comment she made at dinner once about how sentimental people were foolish to hold on to things when they could be liquidated for profit, how objects were just objects and memories did not pay bills. I had laughed it off as millennial pragmatism, but Marcus had gone quiet, changed the subject quickly, and I wondered now if he had seen something in her I refused to acknowledge. I got up at dawn and dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt powerful, professional, the navy blazer I wore to hospital board meetings, the boots that made me stand taller. I practiced my opening line in the mirror. Hello Sienna, imagine running into you here. Too theatrical. Sienna, what a coincidence. Too passive. In the end I decided to let the moment speak for itself, to let her see my face and know immediately that her scheme had unraveled. I left the house at 1:30, giving myself extra time to sit in the hotel lobby and steady my nerves before she arrived. The Grandview Hotel was the kind of place that tried too hard to look expensive. All marble floors and fake chandeliers. The scent of vanilla air freshener trying to mask the underlying smell of old carpet. I sat in a corner chair with a clear view of the entrance, my phone in my hand, the eBay messages pulled up and ready. She walked in at exactly 2 o'clock, my wedding dress draped over her arm in its garment bag, her expression bright and eager, already performing the role of helpful seller for her imaginary buyer. She looked around the lobby, scanning faces, her smile practiced and wide, and I let her search for a moment before I stood up and walked directly toward her. The recognition hit her in stages. First confusion, then surprise, then something darker, something calculating, as she recalibrated her story in real time. Patricia, oh my God, what are you doing here? Her voice was light, performative shock, but her eyes were already working through excuses. I stopped 3 feet away from her, my voice calm and cold. I am here because I am the buyer, Sienna, the one interested in purchasing my own wedding dress that you are selling without my knowledge or permission. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, closed it, glanced around the lobby like she was considering running. I held up my phone showing our entire message exchange. You told me this was a family heirloom your future mother-in-law insisted you sell. Those were your exact words. She recovered faster than I expected, her face rearranging itself into wounded innocence. Patricia, this is a huge misunderstanding. I was going to tell you, I just needed some time to explain. I crossed my arms. Explain what exactly? That you lied to me, that you are profiting off something I trusted you with, that you invented a story about me giving you permission? She stepped closer, lowering her voice, trying to create intimacy, trying to pull me into her version of events. I am in a really difficult financial situation right now, she said, her eyes going soft and pleading. Marcus does not know how bad it is. I did not want to burden him, and I thought if I could just sell a few things quietly, I could fix it before the wedding without anyone getting hurt. I felt my jaw tighten. So you decided to steal from me? She flinched at the word. I was not stealing, I was borrowing against future value. I was going to buy it back after the wedding, I swear.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I shook my head slowly. You listed it as never worn sienna. You were erasing me from its history. You were never planning to return it. She looked away, and I saw the truth in the set of her shoulders, the way her hand tightened on the garment bag like she still thought she might be able to walk away with it. Give me the dress, I said quietly. She hesitated, then thrust it toward me, her face hardening. Fine, take it, but you are going to ruin everything. You are going to destroy Marcus's happiness because you cannot let go of a piece of fabric. I took the garment bag and held it against my chest. This is not about fabric, I said. This is about trust, about integrity, about the kind of person you actually are underneath all the performance. She laughed bitterly. You have no idea what kind of pressure I am under, what it is like trying to fit into your perfect little family with your perfect little traditions. I stared at her. No one asked you to be perfect, Sienna, we asked you to be honest. She looked at me with something close to contempt. Honest does not pay for weddings, Patricia. Honest does not get you the life you want. And with that she turned and walked out of the lobby, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, leaving me standing there, with my dress and a phone full of evidence that would shatter my son's world. I sat back down in the lobby chair, the garment bag across my lap, and I cried for the first time since I saw the listing. Not because of the dress, though holding it again felt like being reunited with a piece of myself I thought was lost, but because I knew what came next. I had to tell Marcus, had to show him who he was about to marry, and the cost of that truth was going to be his heartbreak. I stayed there for almost an hour, letting hotel guests pass by with their luggage and their oblivious happiness, before I finally gathered myself enough to drive home. Marcus was waiting on my front porch when I pulled into the driveway. Sienna had clearly called him, clearly spun some version of events where I was the villain, because his face was tight with confusion and frustration. Mom, what the hell is going on? Sienna just called me crying, saying you ambushed her at a hotel and accused her of stealing? I got out of the car slowly, pulled the garment bag from the back seat, and walked up the steps to where he stood. I did not ambush her, I said evenly. I caught her trying to sell my wedding dress on eBay for $15,000 and arranged to meet the seller, who turned out to be your fiancé, lying about having my permission. He blinked at me like I was speaking another language. That does not make any sense. Why would she do that? I pulled out my phone and showed him everything, the listing, the messages, the screenshots where she claimed I had insisted she sell it. He read through them slowly, his expression shifting from disbelief to something harder to name. She said she needed the money, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. She told me she had some credit card debt from before we met, but she said it was under control. I reached for his hand. Marcus, this is not just about debt, this is about deception, about taking something precious and commodifying it without asking, about lying to both of us. He pulled his hand away, paced the length of the porch. Maybe she panicked, maybe she thought she had no other option. I shook my head. She had options. She could have talked to us, asked for help, been honest about her situation. Instead she chose to steal and lie and then blame me when she got caught. He stopped pacing, looked at me with his father's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with disappointment 30 years ago when I told him I wanted a divorce. You have never liked her, he said quietly. You have been looking for a reason to push her away since the day I introduced you. That accusation landed like a slap. I stepped back, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. That is not fair and you know it. I have welcomed her, included her, trusted her with something that mattered to me. And she betrayed that trust. This is not about my feelings, this is about her actions. He rubbed his face with both hands. I need to talk to her, I need to hear her side. I nodded slowly. You should, but Marcus, before you do, I need you to ask yourself if this is the first time something like this has happened, if there have been other moments that did not quite add up. He looked at me for a long moment, then walked to his car without another word. I watched him drive away, the garment bag still clutched in my hands, and I felt the weight of every hard decision I had ever made as his mother settle on my shoulders once again. That night I hung the dress back in my closet where it belonged, checked it carefully for damage, and found a small stain near the hem that had not been there before, red wine or coffee, something careless and preventable. I treated it with gentle soap and cold water until it lifted, and I cried again for all the ways trust, once broken, leaves marks that never fully disappear. Marcus did not call that night or the next day. I gave him space, forced myself not to text or check in, let him work through whatever Sienna was telling him in private. But on the third day my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Marcus, his voice rough like he had not slept. Mom, can I come over? I said yes immediately, put coffee on and waited. He arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. We sat at the kitchen table in silence while I poured 2 mugs and waited for him to speak. She admitted it, he said finally. Not at first, she tried to say you misunderstood, that it was all a big mix-up. But when I showed her the screenshots, when I pushed her on the details, she broke down and told me everything. I wrapped my hands around my mug. Everything. He nodded. She has been selling things for months. My grandmother's ring I gave her for the engagement, she pawned it and replaced it with a cubic zirconia copy. Antiques from her parents' house that were not hers to take, designer bags she bought on credit and flipped for profit. She has been running this whole operation behind everyone's back. My chest ached for him. I reached across the table and took his hand. I am so sorry. He let me hold it this time, his fingers cold and unsteady. She said she got in too deep with online shopping, that it started small and spiraled, that she was ashamed to ask for help. I asked her why she did not just tell me the truth, and she said she was afraid I would leave her, that I would think she was broken or damaged. I squeezed his hand gently. And what did you say? He looked up at me, tears finally spilling over. I told her I could have helped her if she had been honest, but I cannot marry someone who lies to my face and steals from my mother. We sat there together as the sun came up fully, light streaming through the kitchen windows, and I watched my son grieve the future he thought he was building. He called off the wedding that afternoon, returned the ring, the real one he had bought with money he saved for a year, and moved back into my guest room temporarily while he figured out his next steps. Sienna tried to reach out multiple times, long apology texts and voicemails full of tears and promises to change, but Marcus did not respond. He told me once, late at night when we were both awake and restless, that the worst part was not the betrayal itself but realizing how much of their relationship had been performance, how many moments he thought were real, were actually carefully constructed scenes designed to get what she wanted. 2 months later, I wore my wedding dress one more time. Not to a ceremony but to a professional photo shoot I booked as a gift to myself. I wanted new memories attached to it, ones that were mine alone, images of survival and strength, and the kind of beauty that comes from knowing your own worth. The photographer, a kind woman in her 40s, asked me why I wanted these photos, and I told her the whole story, every detail, and she said something I carry with me still. She said, your dress survived because you knew its value, and your son survived because you taught him his. The dress hangs in my closet now in a new preservation box, acid-free and climate-controlled, and sometimes I open it just to run my fingers over the lace and remember that protecting what matters is not the same as holding on too tight. It is simply refusing to let someone else decide what your treasures are worth. The weeks following Marcus's decision to call off the wedding passed in a strange rhythm of quiet mornings and heavy silences. He moved through my house like a ghost of himself, going to work, coming home, eating dinner without tasting it, and I watched helplessly as he processed the layers of deception that had shaped his entire relationship. I gave him space when he needed it and sat with him when he wanted company, but mostly I waited for the anger to surface, for the questions that would inevitably come. They arrived on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after he had moved back in, when he found me in the garden pulling weeds from the flower beds I had neglected all summer. He stood at the edge of the patio, hands in his pockets, watching me work for several minutes before speaking. Did you ever suspect her before the dress? I sat back on my heels, wiping dirt from my hands onto my jeans. Honestly, I had feelings, instincts that something was not quite right, but I talked myself out of them because I wanted you to be happy. He nodded slowly, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he was not ready to say out loud. I keep going back through everything he said finally, every conversation, every gift, every time she said she loved me, and I cannot tell anymore what was real and what was manipulation. I stood up, brushed the soil from my knees and walked over to where he stood. That is the cruelest part of this kind of betrayal, I said gently. It makes you question your own judgment, your own perceptions, but Marcus, the fact that you loved her honestly does not make you foolish, it makes you human. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. How did you know with Dad? How did you know when to stop trying? I had not expected that question, had not talked about his father in years, but I understood why he was asking it now. I knew when staying started to cost me more than leaving, I said. When protecting the idea of our family meant sacrificing the reality of who I was becoming. He absorbed that in silence, then asked the question I knew had been building in him since the hotel lobby. Do you think I ignored signs because I was desperate not to be alone? I shook my head firmly. I think you saw someone who seemed to offer everything you thought you wanted, and she was very good at being exactly that person until she could not maintain it anymore. That is not the same as being desperate, that is just being hopeful. He exhaled slowly, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. I thought I was ready for marriage, for building a life with someone, but now I do not even trust my own judgment about who that someone should be. I reached for his hand and held it between both of mine. Then do not make any big decisions right now, I said. Give yourself time to heal, to remember who you are outside of that relationship. The rest will come when you are ready. He squeezed my hand and went back inside, and I returned to my weeding, pulling stubborn roots from the earth and thinking about all the ways we learn to distinguish what should stay from what needs to go. The following Saturday, I received an unexpected phone call from a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. A woman's voice, older and tired, came through the line. Is this Patricia Holloway? Yes, I said cautiously. Who is calling? My name is Diane Crawford. I am Sienna's mother, and I need to speak with you about what happened between our children. My first instinct was to end the call immediately, to protect myself and Marcus from whatever justification or accusation was coming, but curiosity and something deeper, a kind of weary compassion, made me stay on the line. I am listening, I said carefully. She sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. I want to apologize for my daughter's behavior, she said. I know that does not fix anything, but I need you to know that what she did does not reflect how she was raised or the values her father and I tried to instill in her. I leaned against the kitchen counter, unsure how to respond. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally, but I am not sure what you are hoping to accomplish with this call. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I am hoping to give you context, not excuses, just context, because I think you deserve to understand how she got to this place. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee the next afternoon at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. I told Marcus where I was going and why, and he looked at me like I was walking into a trap. Mom, you do not owe her mother anything, he said. You do not have to listen to explanations or feel sorry for them. I know, I said, but I need to understand this for myself, not just for you or for closure, but because I need to know if I missed something fundamental about who Sienna was or if she was just that good at hiding. Diane Crawford was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, a woman in her early 60s with Sienna's eyes but none of her polish, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days and holding a mug of coffee with both hands like it was an anchor. She stood when she saw me, offered a tentative smile, and I sat down across from her without returning it. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I was not sure you would. I ordered tea from the server and waited for her to begin, my posture straight, my guard firmly in place. She started slowly, carefully, like she was navigating a minefield of words she had rehearsed but was not sure would land right. Sienna has always been complicated, she said. Even as a child she had this need to appear perfect, to control how people perceived her, and when reality did not match the image she wanted to project, she would adjust the truth until it did. I kept my face neutral. That sounds like more than just childhood insecurity, I said. Diane nodded, her eyes dropping to her mug. When she was 14, we caught her stealing from her grandmother, small things at first, jewelry, cash from her purse, And when we confronted her, she wove this elaborate story about how her grandmother had given her permission, had asked her to hold on to things for safekeeping. My stomach tightened as I recognized the pattern, the same tactic Sienna had used with my wedding dress. Did you get her help? I asked. We tried, Diane said, her voice breaking slightly. Therapy, counseling, everything we could afford, but she learned how to perform for the therapist too, how to say what they wanted to hear while continuing the behavior in secret. By the time she was in college, we thought she had outgrown it. She seemed stable, successful, driven, and we wanted so badly to believe she had changed that we ignored the warning signs when they appeared again. I leaned back in my chair, processing what she was telling me. What warning signs? Diane wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. She lived beyond her means, always bought things she could not afford, created elaborate stories about promotions and bonuses that never materialized, and when we questioned her finances, she accused us of not believing in her, of being unsupportive and cruel. So we stopped asking, stopped pushing, and just hoped she would figure it out before it all came crashing down. I felt a flash of anger rise in my chest. And instead she brought that chaos into my son's life, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Diane flinched but did not look away. Yes, and I am sorrier than I can express for that. I told her when she got engaged that she needed to be honest with Marcus, that starting a marriage on secrets and lies would destroy them both, but she promised me she had it under control, that she was getting help, that this time was different. I shook my head slowly. It was not different, it was just better hidden. Diane nodded, tears welling in her eyes. When she called me after the hotel, when she told me what she had done with your dress, I knew it was over. I knew she had finally pushed too far and hurt someone who would not let it slide. I stared at her across the table, this woman who had carried the weight of her daughter's deception for decades, and I felt something shift in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition of shared pain. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. What do you want from me? She wiped her eyes with a napkin, her hands shaking. I want you to know that Marcus did not deserve what happened to him, that you did not deserve to have your trust violated, and that I take responsibility for not doing more to stop her sooner. I also want you to know that Sienna is getting real help now, inpatient treatment for her spending addiction and the underlying issues, and while that does not change what she did, I hope it means she will not do it to someone else. I sat with that information, turning it over in my mind, trying to separate my anger at Sienna from my empathy for this exhausted mother who had been fighting a losing battle for years. I hope the treatment works, I said finally, not for your sake or even for hers, but because no one should live like that, trapped in a cycle of lies they cannot escape. Diane nodded gratefully. Thank you for saying that. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our drinks, before I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since I sat down. Did you know she was selling things that did not belong to her? Diane closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with shame. I suspected, but I did not have proof, and honestly I was too afraid of what I would find if I looked too closely. I understand that makes me complicit, that my silence enabled her, and I have to live with that. I do not expect you to absolve me, but I needed you to hear it from me directly. I finished my tea and set the cup down carefully. I appreciate you telling me, I said, and I hope Sienna gets the help she needs, but I cannot offer you or her forgiveness right now because the person who needs to hear that is my son, and he is nowhere near ready. Diane nodded, standing as I prepared to leave. I understand, and I did not come here expecting forgiveness, just the chance to apologize and give you the truth I should have given Marcus from the beginning. We parted ways outside the cafe, and I drove home feeling heavier but also strangely lighter, like a piece of the puzzle I had been missing had finally clicked into place. When I told Marcus about the conversation later that evening, he listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, and when I finished he said simply, "Do you believe her?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "I believe she told me her truth," I said. "Whether that is the whole truth or just the version she can live with, I cannot say." He nodded and went quiet again, retreating into the silence that had become his refuge, and I let him go without pushing, understanding that healing from this kind of betrayal was not linear, not neat, and certainly not quick. The next few weeks brought unexpected developments that complicated the narrative I thought I understood. I received a message through Facebook from someone named Rachel Mendez, claiming to be one of Sienna's college roommates and asking if we could talk. I was hesitant, wary of being pulled deeper into Sienna's orbit, but something about the message felt genuine, urgent even, so I agreed to a phone call. Rachel's voice was young but serious when she called that evening. "Thank you for talking to me," she said. "I know this must be incredibly strange, but I felt like I had to reach out after I saw the wedding was called off. I heard from mutual friends what happened and I thought you should." "No, you were not the first." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Rachel took a breath. "When Sienna and I were roommates sophomore year, she borrowed a necklace from me, a family heirloom my grandmother gave me before she died. Said she needed it for a formal event and promised to return it the next day. I never saw it again. When I confronted her, she claimed she had given it back, that I must have lost it, and she was so convincing, so hurt by my accusation, that I actually started to doubt myself. I felt my hands tighten around the phone. Did you ever find it?" Rachel's voice hardened. 2 years later, I saw it for sale on Poshmark, listed by an account that had Sienna's old email address in the username. I saved screenshots before she took it down, but by then we had graduated and lost touch, and I convinced myself it was not worth pursuing. But when I heard about your wedding dress, about the eBay listing, I realized she had been doing this for years, and I felt sick that I had not said something sooner. I thanked Rachel for telling me and asked if she would be willing to share her story with Marcus if he wanted to hear it. She agreed immediately, said she had carried guilt for years about not speaking up, and if her experience could help someone else understand who Sienna really was, she wanted to contribute. I passed her contact information to Marcus, and later that night, I heard him on the phone in his room, his voice rising and falling as Rachel presumably walked him through her own version of betrayal and gaslighting. When he emerged an hour later, his face was different, harder in some ways but also clearer, like pieces of a puzzle he had been forcing together were finally separating into their true shapes. "She has done this to other people," he said, sitting down heavily on the couch beside me. Rachel was not the only one. She connected me with 2 other women who had similar stories, loans that were never repaid, items that went missing and turned up for sale later, lies that were so elaborate and convincing they made people question their own memories. I put my arm around his shoulders. "How are you feeling?" He leaned into me the way he used to as a child when the world felt too big and confusing. "Honestly, relieved. I know that sounds terrible, but hearing that it was not just me, that she had a pattern, that I was not crazy for feeling manipulated, it helps." I kissed the top of his head. "You were never crazy, you were just trusting someone who was very skilled at exploiting trust." He sat up straighter, rubbed his face with both hands. "I want to do something with this information," he said. "I want to warn people, make sure she cannot do this again." I understood the impulse, the need to turn pain into purpose, but I also worried about him getting pulled into a vendetta that would consume him. "Let's think carefully about how to do that," I said, "in a way that protects you and holds her accountable without letting her live rent-free in your head." Over the next week, Marcus connected with the other women Sienna had deceived, and together they compiled a document outlining her patterns, the red flags, the tactics she used to deflect suspicion and maintain control. They did not publish it publicly or try to destroy her reputation, but they did share it privately with mutual friends and acquaintances who might be at risk, a quiet network of protection built from shared experience and hard-won wisdom. I watched my son transform through this process, shedding the self-doubt and shame that had weighed him down and stepping into a version of himself that was more discerning, more grounded, more whole. One evening about 6 weeks after the dress incident, Marcus came into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner and said something that made me pause mid-chop. "Mom, I want to thank you for trusting your instincts even when I pushed back. If you had not followed through with that eBay meeting, if you had just let it go to keep the peace, I would have married her, and we both know how that would have ended." I set down the knife and turned to face him fully. "You do not need to thank me for protecting you," I said. "That is what mothers do. Even when it is hard, even when it creates conflict." He smiled, a real smile, the first one I had seen in weeks. "I know, but I also know it cost you, worrying I would resent you, worrying you were overstepping, and I want you to know it was worth it, you were right to push." We stood there in the warm kitchen, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air, and I felt the kind of gratitude that comes from surviving something that could have broken you, but instead made you both stronger. That Sunday, I took the wedding dress out of its preservation box one more time, not to photograph it or memorialize it, but to alter it. I had decided to shorten it, remove the train, modernize the silhouette so it could be worn again someday, not by me and not for a wedding, but for something joyful and unexpected, a reminder that beautiful things can have second lives if you are willing to let them evolve. I took it to a seamstress I trusted, A woman named Rosa who had been altering clothes in our neighborhood for 30 years. She held the dress carefully, examined the beadwork and lace and said, "This is a masterpiece, are you sure you want to change it?" I nodded. "I am sure, it has been frozen in time long enough. I want it to be something I can actually use, something that brings me joy instead of just sitting in a closet." Rosa smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Then let's make it yours again." 2 weeks later, I picked up the transformed dress. Now a knee-length cocktail dress with the same beautiful lace and beading but a completely new shape and energy. I wore it to Marcus's work fundraiser that next month, and when people complimented it, I told them the whole story, the original wedding, the betrayal, the reclamation, and every time I spoke it aloud it lost a little more power to hurt me and gained a little more power to remind me of my own resilience. Marcus saw me in it for the first time at the event and his eyes went wide. "Mom, you look incredible, is that?" I nodded. "It is, and it is mine again, fully and completely." The months that followed brought a kind of peace I had not expected. Not the absence of pain but the presence of clarity, the understanding that sometimes the worst betrayals are also the clearest teachers. Marcus started dating again slowly, cautiously, and I watched him apply the lessons he had learned, setting boundaries, asking hard questions, trusting his instincts when something felt off. He moved into his own apartment eventually, ready to rebuild his independence, but we stayed close, talking several times a week, meeting for Sunday dinners, maintaining the bond that had been tested and had held. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sienna completed her treatment program and moved to another state, starting over with a new job and new people who did not know her history. I felt nothing when I learned that, not satisfaction, not anger, just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that her story and mine had diverged and would likely never intersect again. Marcus had a different reaction. A flash of old hurt followed by a conscious decision to let it go, to stop tracking her movements or caring about her redemption, to simply move forward with his own life. 1 year after the eBay incident, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from Sienna, 3 pages of small, careful script outlining her apologies, her progress in therapy, her understanding now of the harm she had caused and the patterns she had perpetuated. She did not ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, just acknowledged the truth and took responsibility without excuses or justifications. I read it twice, then called Marcus and asked if he wanted to see it. He thought for a long moment before saying, "No, I believe she is sorry, and I believe she is working on herself, but I do not need to absorb her guilt or participate in her healing, that is her work to do." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, not to forget it but to file it away as a closed chapter, evidence of growth that belonged to her journey, not ours. That same week, Marcus introduced me to someone new. A woman named Kira he had met through work, who was kind and funny and refreshingly straightforward. I watched them together over coffee, the easy way they laughed, the honest way they communicated, and I saw in my son a version of himself that was whole and healthy and ready to build something real. When Kira excused herself to take a phone call, Marcus leaned across the table and said quietly, "She knows the whole story. I told her everything about Sienna, about the dress, about the lies, and she did not run away or think I was damaged goods. She just listened and said everyone has a past and what matters is who we choose to be now." I reached across and squeezed his hand. "That is exactly right, and that is exactly the kind of person who deserves you." He smiled, that open, genuine smile I had missed for so long, and I knew with absolute certainty that the hard things we had endured, the confrontations and the grief and the slow work of healing, had all been worth it to arrive at this moment of clarity and hope. The dress hangs in my closet now in its new form, and sometimes I wear it to dinner parties or gallery openings, each time adding new memories and associations that have nothing to do with weddings or betrayals, just the simple pleasure of wearing something beautiful that has survived its own transformation. People still ask about it, drawn to the vintage lace and intricate beading, and I tell them the short version or the long version depending on how much time we have and how well I know them, but always I end the same way, with the reminder that the most valuable things we own are not the ones we protect behind glass but the ones we trust enough to wear, to use, to let evolve into whatever they need to become. Marcus called me late one evening months later, his voice thick with emotion, and said, "Mom, I proposed to Kira tonight," and she said yes. My heart swelled with joy so pure it brought tears to my eyes. "That is wonderful, sweetheart. I am so happy for you both." He paused, then added, "And Mom, she does not want to borrow your dress, she wants to find her own, but she asked if you would help her look, if you would be part of that process with her." I smiled through my tears. I would be honored, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. When we went dress shopping the following month, Kira tried on dozens of gowns while I sat in the viewing area offering opinions and encouragement, and when she finally found the one, a simple silk column with delicate straps and a low back, she turned to me with happy tears and said, "What do you think?" I stood and walked to where she stood on the platform, took her hands in mine and said, "I think you look like exactly who you are. And that is the most beautiful thing anyone can be on their wedding day." She hugged me tight, and I felt the weight of the past year, all the pain and learning and growth, settle into something like wisdom, the kind that only comes from walking through fire and choosing to keep walking until you find your way back to solid ground. The wedding took place on a clear October afternoon in a garden venue surrounded by oak trees that had turned gold and crimson with the season. I stood in the bridal suite helping Kira with her veil, my hand steady and sure, thinking about how different this moment felt from the anxiety and dread that had preceded what would have been Marcus's first wedding to Sienna. There was no tension here, no undercurrent of doubt, just genuine happiness and the kind of calm that comes from knowing everyone in the room is exactly who they claim to be. Kira looked at me in the mirror, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you for being here. For welcoming me into your family after everything that happened." I adjusted the veil and met her gaze. "You made that easy," I said honestly. "You showed up as yourself from the beginning, no performance, no pretense, just the real you, and that is all we ever needed." She turned and hugged me, careful not to wrinkle her dress, and whispered, "I promise to take care of him, to be honest even when it is hard, to never make you question whether I deserve to be part of this family." I held her tighter. "I already know you do." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, Marcus's vows bringing tears to nearly everyone present, especially when he spoke about learning the difference between love that asks you to shrink and love that helps you grow. Kira's vows were equally moving, promising partnership and transparency, and the kind of everyday faithfulness that builds a life worth living. I sat in the front row beside Kira's parents, watching my son marry someone who saw him clearly and loved him anyway, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us all to this moment. At the reception, Marcus pulled me onto the dance floor for the mother-son dance, and as we swayed to the music, he leaned close and said, "I never thanked you properly for stopping me from making the biggest mistake of my life." I looked up at him, this man who would always be my little boy no matter how tall he grew. "You do not need to keep thanking me," I said. "I would do it again 1,000 times. He smiled. "I know you would, and that is exactly why I turned out okay, because you never let me settle for less than I deserved, even when I could not see it myself." The song ended and we returned to our seats, and I watched Marcus and Kira cut their cake, laugh with their friends, dance with abandon, and I thought about all the ways protection and love sometimes look like difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. Later that evening, as guests began to leave and the sky darkened to deep purple, Kira's maid of honor approached me with a glass of champagne and a curious expression. "I heard about what happened with Marcus's ex-fiancée," she said carefully, "and I just want to say I think you are incredibly brave for trusting your instincts and following through." I accepted the champagne and considered her words. "I do not know if it was bravery," I said, "or just the inability to ignore what was right in front of me, but either way, I am grateful it happened before the wedding instead of after." She nodded thoughtfully. "My sister went through something similar, ignored all the red flags because she wanted so badly to believe in the fairy tale, and it cost her years of her life and half of everything she owned in the divorce. I am glad Marcus had you looking out for him." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the newlyweds pose for photos under the oak trees, and I felt the full weight of what could have been lifted completely from my shoulders. The weeks after the wedding settled into a new rhythm as Marcus and Kira returned from their honeymoon and began building their life together in a small house across town. I visited occasionally, always calling first, respecting their space and independence, and every time I walked through their door, I saw evidence of healthy partnership, shared decision-making, bills paid on time, honest conversations about money and goals and expectations. It was unremarkable in the best possible way, the kind of steady, truthful foundation that does not make for dramatic stories but makes for lasting marriages. One afternoon about 2 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email from Diane Crawford, Sienna's mother. The subject line read simply, "Update and gratitude." I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I wanted to maintain any connection to that chapter of our lives, but curiosity won out. The email was brief and straightforward. explaining that Sienna had been sober from compulsive spending for over a year, had maintained steady employment, and had recently started volunteering with a financial literacy program for young adults struggling with debt and addiction. Diane wrote that she knew this information changed nothing about what had happened, but she wanted me to know that my refusal to enable Sienna's behavior had been a turning point, the moment Sienna could no longer hide from the consequences of her actions. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Marcus with a simple note, asking if he wanted to discuss it. He called me an hour later, his voice measured and calm. "I am glad she is doing better," he said. "I genuinely hope she builds a healthy life and does not hurt anyone else the way she hurt us, but I do not need updates about her progress, and I do not want to be part of her redemption story. That is her journey, not mine." I understood completely, told him I felt the same way, and we agreed that I would politely ask Diane not to send further updates. I drafted a kind but firm response thanking her for letting me know but explaining that Marcus and I needed to fully close that chapter in order to move forward with our own lives. Diane replied within hours, apologizing for overstepping and respecting our boundaries, and that was the last communication I had with anyone from Sienna's orbit. It felt like closing a book I had been holding open for too long, finally allowing it to rest on the shelf with all the other completed stories that shaped who I had become. Spring arrived with its usual explosion of color and possibility, and I found myself thinking less about what had been stolen and more about what had been preserved. My relationship with Marcus was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that had been tested and had held. My friendship with Kira was genuine and growing, not forced or performative but based on real affection and shared values. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, teaching financial literacy classes and sharing my own experiences with trust and betrayal in ways that helped others recognize dangerous patterns before they became crises. The work was deeply fulfilling, giving purpose to the pain I had endured and transforming it into something useful and healing. One evening after class, a young woman named Teresa approached me, tears in her eyes, and said my story about the wedding dress had helped her realize she was in a relationship built on lies and manipulation. She had ended it that week, she told me, and even though it hurt, she knew it was right. I hugged her and told her the hurt would fade but the wisdom she had gained would last forever. Marcus and Kira announced they were expecting their first child that summer, and the joy that filled our family was pure and uncomplicated, untainted by secrets or hidden agendas. I helped them prepare the nursery, painting walls and assembling furniture, and as we worked together, Kira asked me about my own experience becoming a mother, the fears and hopes and unexpected challenges. I told her honestly about raising Marcus alone, about the loneliness and the strength I discovered in myself, about the mistakes I made and the things I would do differently, and she listened without judgment, absorbing the stories like precious gifts she would carry into her own motherhood. When my granddaughter was born in late February, I held her in my arms and looked into her tiny face and made a silent promise to teach her the value of truth, the importance of trusting her instincts, and the courage to walk away from anything or anyone that asks her to be less than she is. Marcus and Kira named her Claire, a different spelling but close enough to my middle name that I felt honored and deeply moved. They asked me to be present for all the important moments, not as a babysitter or obligation, but as a cherished member of their family circle, and I accepted with overwhelming gratitude. As Claire grew from infant to toddler, I watched Marcus and Kira navigate parenthood with the same honesty and partnership they brought to their marriage, having hard conversations about division of labor and conflicting parenting styles, working through disagreements without letting resentment build, modeling for their daughter what healthy love actually looks like. I thought often about how different Claire's childhood would be from what it might have been if Marcus had married Sienna, how she would grow up in a home where words matched actions and trust was not a weapon, but a gift freely given and carefully maintained. On Claire's second birthday, we gathered at Marcus and Kira's house for a small celebration, and as I watched my granddaughter tear into her presence with gleeful abandon, Marcus came and stood beside me. "You are thinking about Sienna," he said quietly, not a question but a statement. I looked at him, surprised he had read my mind so accurately. "How did you know?" He smiled. "Because I was too. Thinking about how grateful I am that this is Claire's reality instead of whatever alternative universe we avoided." I nodded, slipping my arm through his. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found that eBay listing?" He was quiet for a moment, watching Kira help Claire open a box. "All the time," he said finally. "I think about how she would have kept escalating, kept lying, Kept taking until there was nothing left, and I think about Claire growing up watching that dysfunction and thinking it was normal. Then I think about you, about the fact that you could have ignored your instincts to keep the peace, and I realize how close we came to disaster. I squeezed his arm. But we did not. That is what matters. We saw the truth and we acted on it, and now we get this beautiful, honest, real life. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Claire was asleep, Kira showed me something she had been working on. A scrapbook documenting their journey from engagement to marriage to parenthood. She had included photos, mementos, handwritten notes, and toward the back, a section she had titled Lessons Learned. In it she had written about the importance of transparency, about red flags and green flags, about surrounding yourself with people who tell you the truth, even when it is hard to hear. She had included a photo of me from the wedding, and beneath it she had written, Patricia taught me that protecting the people you love sometimes means being the one willing to ask difficult questions and face uncomfortable answers. I read those words and felt tears sting my eyes. You did not have to include this, I said softly. She looked at me with complete sincerity. Yes, I did, because it is one of the most important things I have learned from being part of this family, and I want Claire to know it too when she is old enough to understand. We sat together on the couch, the scrapbook open between us, and I thought about legacy, about the things we pass down that matter more than money or heirlooms, the lessons about character and integrity, and the courage to stand firm in your convictions. Years passed with the gentle accumulation of ordinary moments that make up a well-lived life. Claire started kindergarten, Marcus got promoted at work, Kira published her first novel, and I retired from nursing to spend more time with my family and my volunteer work. The wedding dress, now thoroughly transformed into something new, hung in my closet alongside other pieces I loved and wore regularly. No longer a symbol of what was lost but a reminder of what was reclaimed and remade. I wore it to Claire's kindergarten graduation, to Marcus's promotion dinner, to Kira's book launch, each wearing adding another layer of meaning and memory. One afternoon when Claire was 7, she found me in my closet organizing clothes and asked about the dress. That is so pretty, Grandma, where did you get it? I pulled it out and held it up for her to see properly. This was my wedding dress, I said, but I had it changed into something I could wear more often. Her eyes widened. You can do that? I laughed. You can do anything you want with things that belong to you, especially if it means they bring you more joy. She reached out and touched the lace carefully. Will you tell me about your wedding? I sat down on the floor with her and told her about marrying her grandfather, about the young woman I had been, full of hope and dreams, about the marriage that did not last but gave me her father, about learning that sometimes the best things come from experiences that do not turn out the way you planned. She listened with the intense focus children bring to stories that help them make sense of the world. And when I finished, she asked, "Were you sad when you got divorced?" I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her truth without burdening her with adult complexities. I was sad for a while, I said, but I was also relieved because staying in something that was not working would have made me sadder for much longer. She nodded thoughtfully, processing this information through the lens of her young understanding. Daddy says you are the bravest person he knows. I smiled, touched by this second-hand compliment. Your daddy is very kind, but I think brave is just what people call you when you do hard things that need to be done. She stood up and hugged me fiercely. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. I held her close, breathing in the apple-scented shampoo in her hair, and whispered, "You already are, sweetheart, every single day." That evening I told Marcus about the conversation, and he smiled with paternal pride. She is obsessed with you, he said. Half the stories she writes at school are about her grandma, who is strong and smart, and does not let anyone push her around. I laughed, embarrassed and pleased. I hope I am not creating a tiny rebel. He shook his head. You are creating a tiny person who knows her worth and will not settle for less than she deserves, and that is exactly what the world needs more of. We sat together in comfortable silence, and I felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing your life, with all its mistakes and triumphs, has meant something beyond yourself. The anniversary of finding the eBay listing came and went without fanfare or acknowledgement. Just another day that happened to coincide with a moment that had changed everything. I thought about it briefly while making breakfast, how 4 years had passed since I stood in that hotel lobby confronting Sienna, how much had shifted and settled in that time. The anger had long since faded, replaced by something closer to indifference, a neutral acknowledgement that she had been part of our story, but was no longer part of our present. I wondered sometimes if she thought about us, if she carried guilt or regret or had managed to fully move on. But mostly I did not wonder at all. My energy focused on the life I was actively building rather than the one I had narrowly avoided. Marcus called later that day to tell me Kira was pregnant again, their second child due in the fall, and the happiness in his voice was so pure it made my heart swell. "I am going to need your help again, Mom," he said. "You were such a rock with Claire. I cannot imagine doing this without you." I assured him I would be there for whatever they needed, and after we hung up, I sat with the quiet joy of being needed and valued, of having relationships built on genuine love, rather than obligation or performance. The contrast between this and what could have been was not lost on me, and I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe or fate or whatever force had led me to that eBay listing at exactly the right moment. When Marcus and Kira's second daughter was born, they named her Rose Patricia, and I cried happy tears holding this tiny person who carried my name into the future. The family we had built, fractured and remade and strengthened through adversity, felt solid and true, rooted in honesty and watered with the kind of love that does not demand perfection but insists on authenticity. I looked at my two granddaughters, at Marcus and Kira, at the life we had all created together, and I knew with absolute certainty that every difficult choice, every uncomfortable conversation, every moment of standing firm in the face of pressure to back down had been worth it to arrive here. The dress still hangs in my closet, worn and loved and thoroughly integrated into my life, no longer precious in the way untouchable things are precious but valuable in the way useful things are valuable. I will pass it to Claire someday when she is older, along with the story of its transformation, the lesson that beautiful things can survive change and become even more meaningful in their new forms. And when she wears it, whether to a party or a date or her own wedding if she chooses to marry, she will carry forward the knowledge that protection and love sometimes look like difficult questions, that trust is built through consistent honesty, and that the most valuable inheritance anyone can receive is the courage to honor truth over comfort. Up next, you have got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you will not want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.